Hello, my name's Hannes, this is Painting by Letters, and today I want to do something fun with a friend. So I set this up a little bit in my last video, but just to sort of run through the basic conceit. Myself and a friend will be painting models together. Originally the idea came from my friend that he would buy and paint some models and send them to me in the post, and then I was supposed to sort of critique them and sort of rip them to shreds, that kind of thing. After discussing this idea a little bit, we sort of both realised that there would be quite a lot of cost for him to buy everything that he needs to do to paint some models. So I said that he should just come to mine at some point, and I would supply everything that he needed, and I planned a weekend schedule to really allow him to experience the Warhammer hobby in its fullness. You can see the results of that, the bits that I think I did well and the bits that I think I did badly in my last video. But in this one we're just going to be talking about the painting and modelling side of this experience. So we went to a games workshop, we picked out a box of his choice. In this case it's some Hormagaunts. The store manager at the time tried to talk us out of this, as I'm aware that obviously the brand new Hormagaunts have also just released as well. I really wonder if they fall over less. It's an experience that I've had since having these around the house, because they fall over all the time. But nevertheless, we went and bought this box and then we came back to mine. The rules were really simple. They were laid out by my friend, which was that I could supply sort of the very basics, but he wanted to work out bits by himself. So initially I just talked him through the very basics of cleaning the minis. You'll see later on in this video that there's some stuff that hasn't been done. There's certain sprue gates that haven't been cleaned, mold lines that haven't been fixed, and I think one of the two sprues had a little bit of a mold slip almost. So there's a couple of things that are slightly misproportioned. Despite that issue, I do think these old kits actually hold up really well. I wasn't expecting to think that. I mean, I'm in the background, and you'll see it in a few weeks' time, beginning to stick together some of the Leviathan boxes. And sure, they have much more detail on those modern kits, but these old ones still are really dynamic, really interesting, and really quite cool. I'm very excited to get my teeth into Tyranids properly and to paint them a little bit, but nevertheless, that's by the by. Once we'd finished building them, I went off and primed them. This was admittedly a mistake. I primed them black. The reason I primed them black, full disclosure, is because Chaos Black primer was the only one that I had in. Right now, I'm experimenting with lots of dry brushing and things like that, and it's a really good primer to work up from for things like that. It's often one that people talk about. So I sort of stockpiled Chaos Black. Unfortunately, this means that primed colours that would have helped my friend have a much better painting time weren't really present. To try and help him a little bit, I did set out my wet palette. These Army Painter wet palettes are actually quite small. I've just bought a larger one for myself. They're not too bad, but I do think as a beginner they're quite limiting. But nevertheless, following the rules that he set out, I didn't talk about paint thinning really. He did dabble in it a little bit. Some of the Vallejo model color paints do have this capacity when slightly over thin to completely change their results and become very glossy for some reason, and some of the models that he ends up with do end up with that problem in one or two places. Where I can, I've sort of shot around that, I suppose. I really just have to stop for a minute watching the B-roll as I am, remarking about the fact that this was just an entirely pleasurable experience. There's a couple of things going on right now in my life, I suppose, which is why I've been really quiet in sort of the comments and things like that, and I'm really sorry to people that has been something that's going on. There's just some stuff in my life just kind of getting in the way of me really enjoying parts of my life, I suppose, and this just was a very special experience. Sitting across from a friend, concentrating on something, doing our own things, but just talking and chatting and debating bits of lore and stuff like that. This was truly a pleasurable experience and something I think I need to get back to. I think I need to do more social things with people. Anyway, my introspection over for the day. Andrew set me very simple rules when it came to judging his models, which was he wanted me to tear into them, but I'll let the two of us explain that. So, Andrew, what you asked for was a critique.
Gordon Ramsay me.
Yeah, I don't do that.
Okay.
It's a critique though. So
Okay.
we've got 2.5 minutes of this, and then so I'm just going to play this all at once, and then we'll talk about it at the end, if that's okay. And then once we've done that, we'll talk about what I did to replicate the same effect.
Okay.
So let's start with the first one. We have this kind of purpley underneath and then a red over the top. It's not been a brilliantly thinned paint, but again, this was his first time ever painting. I'm not going to hold that against him. His second one was this. So we got this quite light blue skin underneath, and then quite a dark green claw and back as well. So the kind of the carapacey bits are all this very dark green. Actually, it looks like that is a really dark green, and the claws and the hooves are a slightly lighter green than that one is. And we can also see a bit of a brown face. Next we have this one here. So we've got this immediately really striking set of back plates here. On top of that, the claws and hooves are also mirroring that very striking green. Underneath, at first glance, I thought it was black underneath, but it's not. I'm not sure how well this will show up on camera. There seems to be some kind of very lightly washed dark green across the black as well. So it's all green, but it is very effective, I think. Next, we have this kind of blue purple one. So we've got quite a deep blue underneath, and then it's a purpley kind of top and head, but it seems to be coloured in ever so slightly with a red in the recesses as well.
Anyways, yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Okay, so this is where this video is going to get a little bit weird, and that's essentially because we recorded a whole discussion and unfortunately half the audio is missing. There's nothing I can really do to recoup that. I can't go and get my friend's live reaction or anything like that. So instead what I'm going to play is sort of my initial ideas about what to do, then a bit of a discussion about what I do, and then closing this video out a bit of a comparison, I suppose. So I'm just going to talk through each one by one, although at the moment you're sort of seeing clips of me over several evenings have a go. So for the red purple one, it's darker tones, it's quite warm. I thought it needed a little bit more consistency. So my initial idea was to base the entire thing purple, and then for the carapace and for the skin to build from that purple in slightly different ways. For the weird blue, green, brown one, I thought it was all just a bit too contrasty. I decided to have a go with the same kind of idea, but see where I could end up. So a darker blue base, mid-light blue layers, that kind of thing. And then for the carapace, trying to build from blue into greens. I had a go at the head as well, but just really struggled with that one. For the blue-purple one, I thought it was a really interesting, almost tabletop time-esque, if you've seen their speed painting for Tyranid style. I decided to follow that a little bit by undercoating with warmer but deeper colours and then trying to dry brush through purples into kind of more blues. And then the green on green one, which I absolutely loved, I decided to use a traditional sort of slap chop for the skin to build up that kind of dark green. And then for the carapace, using the same mix that I do for my Necron shoulder pads to build kind of a yellowy orange green almost, to kind of contrast the cool with the warm. I've got to say there's something completely different about picking up paints to follow schemes that you haven't designed yourself, or at least thought about yourself. One of the things that I'm doing in my own time that will be appearing on the channel in the not too distant future is messing about with a scheme that a YouTuber popularized. And in so doing, I'm learning a lot about techniques, things that I'm good at, and also things that I'm bad at as well. There is something genuinely different about picking up a set of models and following a style that you just never normally would. Now in this case, I would say that most of these models are pure experimental. They're someone just completely set loose on paints and models and things that they find interesting. They're just experimenting. In some cases I think it works, in some cases it doesn't. In all cases there are some things that I would do differently, but again, by picking these models up, messing about with the way that you paint them, in messing about with ways that you approach a challenge like this, I think you can learn quite a lot. One of the things the online side of this hobby really has to answer for is the 1-2 heavy metal kind of production that we see. I mean, this channel is nowhere near that, of course. This is very much someone who picked up the hobby. This is someone who's been back in the hobby for what, over a year? But not a great deal over a year. For most of that I was painting one scheme, not really venturing out, not really learning that much else, just picking the one thing that I thought I knew and found interesting and sticking with it. Now I approach this moment of wanting to do more interesting things, wanting to do different projects, wanting to pick up armies that I either haven't touched since I was about 13, or armies that are entirely new to me on a painting side of things. This sort of, albeit slightly bizarre, picking up 4 models and trying to copy 4 other models became a really interesting way to dissect the painting experience. Don't get me wrong, you have to be willing to lose a box of something, but I think you learn a lot about expression and creativity in something like this. So if you happen to have a friend who's trying to get into the hobby or something like that, I'd really recommend what we did here. Pick up a box, paint them together. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be at the same time. This wasn't. You'll learn quite a bit out of the process if I've got anything to go by. And I feel a lot more invigorated to approach my next project once this one's been completed. So firstly, the blue, green, brown one. This one just absolutely doesn't work for me. One of the things out of the discussion between myself and Andrew, which unfortunately has been lost, is he basically said that this was the first model he picked up. It was sort of just throwing paint at a model and seeing what happened. I do think there's something to in my version where I've tried to sort of punch the sort of warmer colours somewhere, but it just doesn't work where it's placed. I would call it a hit and a miss, but I think it's all miss really. Due to the lighting in the room, the kind of purpley blue on Andrew's model unfortunately just looks pure blue in lots of these images, whereas my kind of purpley blue ends up looking a lot pinker. I will say that I lent much more into those pinky and warmer tones, but you can kind of see that we're aiming at the same ballpark. I think his is probably tonally better because it has that cooler with the warmth, but I do think that on mine the reds are a bit better defined. I think they make a bit more sense, and I also do think that that purple would work quite well, potentially with a wash, which I didn't really have time to do for this video, but I do think that would work better as a skin. That would probably work really nicely with a very cold ice blue carapace maybe. So something I didn't realise when I was painting these, which came out of the discussion with Andrew while we were reviewing these models, was that once he'd hit the halfway point, he was aiming to find a very cohesive style in the last two. With this one, he was aiming very much for a midnight blue kind of scheme. So you can see here that I've sort of aped that. I've gone slightly lighter on the blues, but then the bluey purple, again, due to the lighting and white balance, it comes out more bluey here. I've used that same mix that I did for the skin on the previous one, and I tried to create a bit of a mottled pattern on the carapace. It does just give a little bit more visual interest. I don't think it's a style that would work well over an army, because I think it would just sort of blend into a sea of blue. If that's what you're after though, it could work. And then we get to the model that I think is probably going to be inspiring my own Tyrannid army in a way. I didn't understand what Andrew was going for, but I approached this with a sort of a darker versus a lighter version of the same colour, in this case green. So we can see that we've got quite a dark drab green, which is just a basic slap chop with a dark green contrast over the top, and then a very light punchy yellow green up to that really nice moot green over the carapace and claws and things like that. The thing that I didn't understand, which Andrew explained to me while we were chatting, is that what he was aiming for here was almost like a kind of glow-in-the-dark look on the carapace with just sort of jet black skin. I obviously didn't ape that style. I went for something slightly different. But this is actually a model that I'm quite proud of. It's the only one of the four personally that I think actually came out okay. And as I say, I do think it's going to be a huge inspiration behind the style that I want to do my own Tyrannids in. It won't be green, but it does give me a decent idea of where I want to take my own models. So just to round this video off really quickly, I think I've shown two people having fun, being friends together, and experiencing a hobby together. This is not your traditional hobby YouTube video. There is no tip or scheme to follow. It was just two people experimenting with tools, messing about, having fun, and making fun of each other as well as mates do. I hope you've enjoyed it. We certainly did. And I have to say, I found this whole experience really invigorating. I'm looking forward to doing more of this. Anywho, I've been Hannes. This has been Painting by Letters, and keep safe out there.